is the Director of Career and Professional Development for the Office of Graduate and Postdoctoral Affairs. So that's a mouthful, but I'm here to serve you. That's essentially what I'm here for. The office serves all graduate students and postdocs across all schools. We have many, many people represented here today. So graduate students, postdocs from many different schools across the university, several different disciplines. So just wanted to let you know you're in good company. We also have lots of people online, and so this session is being recorded so that you will be able to watch it later. Okay. Also very pleased to welcome Sam Lake. Sam Lake is the Assistant Director of Research Communication within our office. Not only does he assist graduate students and postdocs with career and professional development, he also helps you with any type of communication. So writing fellowship applications, writing grant applications, developing your research statement for a faculty job. He focuses primarily in STEM, but does serve all disciplines. And then Kelly Oman is his counterpart for the humanities and social sciences. So Kelly Oman is also an Assistant Director of Research Communication in our office. So thank you to Sam for helping me teach today. He will be leading the panel discussion at 2:30, where we have live faculty members who will talk about the academic job search. So just wanted to also welcome Fatima Saldana Morales, who's in the audience now here live. She's distributing some information to all of the folks in person about our faculty workshop series. So for the future faculty workshops that are coming up, feel free to attend any and all that makes sense for you personally. So if you feel strongly about your CV and cover letter now, you don't necessarily have to attend that session, but you may want to attend the session on reflective teaching statements, for example. Take a look at the entire series. It's on our website, which is just phdplus.virginia.edu. And you'll see under modules, there's a module called Future Faculty, and all of the workshops coming up, not only for the summer, but also well into the fall are listed there. Last year, how many of you attended any of the Future Faculty workshops? Just a show of hands, online and in person. Okay, so just a couple. So with those workshops, we actually collected feedback from those who attended, and they asked us to start the series earlier. So here we are today, and to include how to interview effectively for academic jobs and how to negotiate for faculty jobs. So those two are coming up in the fall, in October and November. So keep an eye out for those. So here we are, that's the team, and very happy to be working with all of them. And all of us are here to help you with your career and professional development. You likely have already started to think about your faculty career. You have your own considerations and perspective. Where we're coming from is from a U.S. lens. So we're talking today about U.S. academic norms and research and teaching institutions. So in terms of today's topics, we'll cover the upcoming workshops. We'll cover Canvas Connect, which is our new portal, the portal that the entire university is moving to from CoLab. We'll show you how to get into the system so you can access this recording and other resources, the academic job search process and timeline, kinds of institutions, hiring practices and assessment tools, and how to look for positions and refine your application. So this is our calendar for the summer and early fall. So we have two items I wanted to point out to you. Not only the CV and cover letter workshop, which is online on June 20th, but also these two at the bottom, the writing retreats that are coming up in person in the fall, and application review sessions will be in person and one-on-one. So we'll be able to review your materials. All four of us can review materials for faculty job applications, and we're here to help you. With the writing retreats, you might attend one of the many writing retreats with other colleagues who are on the faculty job market, and work on your writing for your research statement, teaching statement, diversity and inclusive excellence statement. Okay, this is what Canvas Connect looks like. So I just wanted to show you, this is when you first get into the course, you should see this front page. How many of you received an invitation to get into the course? Awesome. So Sam, just so you know, just about everybody raised their hand. So thank you, Sam, for adding them. And for those of you online, hoping you're in the course too. So essentially, if you click on modules, this is what you'll see. So you'll see navigating the academic job search. So in addition to that, we have added the recording from last year, so you can watch and see what we covered last year. But also, for those of you in the humanities and social sciences, there's a recording that focuses on the postdoc and faculty experience in those fields. So just wanted to let you know about that. We have the same for STEM, but just wanted to call attention to those resources. So to check in with you, I wanted to ask you if you could, with your phone, go to menti.com and enter the code that's listed here. So this is a question that we wanted to know about you. So what are the most important factors that you are looking for currently in a faculty job? Okay, location, teaching load, environment, funding, mentorship, tenure track job, sure, job security. Okay, so the Northeast. I'm actually from Boston, so that's terrific, although there are a lot of good schools everywhere. So research support, research flexibility. Look at the most popular answer though is location, location, location. So you may have family ties in certain places. You may just have geographic preferences. So we can help you to work on your search in that way. And I'll later on in the session, I'll be showing you a website that focuses on geographic preferences for faculty jobs. So okay, just wanted to give you a sense of what all of your colleagues are looking for in a faculty job. And we'll revisit this later on. Okay. So academic job search timeline, it takes 9 to 10 months. You likely are familiar with this timeline, but there are job postings available now. And as much as this graphic starts in early fall, the 2 job ads, bless you, that I pulled for today, I just pulled off of the Chronicle a couple days ago. So there are jobs listed now. And so you might see application deadlines in June, July, August, September, October, November, possibly, because a big volume of jobs tends to come out later in the summer and early fall. And the first round of interviews will happen in December, typically, usually on Zoom. And then on-campus interviews tend to happen in February and March, with job offers following that. So your appointment would begin August 2025 if you do land a faculty job. I wanted to share that this, and I think we all know this is a tough academic job market, but there are so many career options available for PhDs and postdocs in all disciplines. So if you are interested in a faculty role, we can certainly help you to apply for those and come and talk to us about any other options that might be interesting to you. Maybe working in a government lab, maybe working in a think tank, maybe working in science policy in DC, maybe working for a museum. So lots and lots of jobs require PhDs. That's what my research is on. So I just wanted to let you know, we're here for you to identify other career options. So in terms of the way that this begins, most tenure track jobs, as we said, will come up in the fall, but it's slow and it takes this whole job search takes a long time. If you come and visit with us, you will likely find a job search for other options takes less time. This is one of the longest job search processes in terms of occupations. Okay. Consider all of your possible career paths. We've talked about applying for faculty positions, cluster hire programs, and institutional programs. Some institutions have programs that would have you enter as a postdoc and then move into a faculty role at that institution. So that's something else we can help you identify now or in the fall. During winter break, you can organize your materials and start to think about maybe visiting positions, postdoc positions, and in the spring, apply for, visiting postdoc and other positions of interest. If you are not invited to interview by Thanksgiving or mid-December, come and see us because that is sort of a helpful cutoff point, in terms of most faculty jobs having been recruited for and first round interviews having happened. So in terms of the types of institutions in the US, there is a classification called the Carnegie classification. This ranks universities just by the types of degrees that they offer. And so there are 466 doctoral universities in the US. For those who are considering a research university like the University of Virginia, an R1, this indicates that there's very high research activity at that university. There are 146 institutions that are R1s in the US. So not as many as, say, master's colleges and universities, so those institutions that offer master's level degrees, 669, and then baccalaureate degrees, 524, plus those that offer associate's degrees and bachelor's degrees. And then associate's colleges, 2-year and community colleges, 936. So if you want to find out more about the Carnegie classification, you can look it up on the web, and I'll show you the website in a minute. You can also use the National Center for Educational Statistics. They have a tool called College Navigator, which you can also use to find information on institutions that you're applying for. So this is, and I apologize for the bar, I just want to keep it out of our way. This is the institution search on the Carnegie classification. So you can look up doctoral universities with very high research activity in your geographic area of interest. It will pull up enrollment, whether it's public or private, where it is, and other details. And then the same is true for the College Navigator. So University of Virginia main campus, a lot of detail here, and then information about the school, enrollment, admissions, and retention and graduation. Information you might want before you apply, might inform your documents, and certainly when you're interviewing. So common categories for 2- and 4-year institutions include not-for-profit and for-profit institutions, which generate revenue and don't receive federal aid. The funding source is public or private. You all likely attended different kinds of institutions, and we just wanted to share the breadth with you today. Some institutions were formed as land-grant institutions and have a particular charge by the state. Some institutions are minority serving, and some are liberal arts colleges. In terms of minority serving institutions, there are HBCUs, you may hear that acronym, which are historically Black colleges or universities, HSIs, TCUs, and then ANAPISI, Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institutions. So lots of different types of institutions in the US, some that you may want to target specifically. So just wanted to share that. When you're thinking about this, and thinking about what kind of institution might be best for you, here are some attributes that you might have. And I'm going to see if I can I hide the video panel? No. Can I hide floating meeting controls? Yes, I can. All right. So research-focused universities focus on innovation, analytical thinking, persistence, initiative, typically require high research output, which you likely know. Research and teaching-focused universities are a combination, or teaching-focused colleges and universities will require dependability, concern for others, and a more social orientation because you'll have such high interaction with the students. In terms of expectations, these are some of the differences, right? So with research intensive, like here at UVA, you'll see graduate students and postdocs. Typically, you'll receive a large research budget with facilities and equipment, low teaching load, and a highly selective student population. And then if you move to research and teaching, primarily undergraduate, research projects tend to be research experiences for undergraduate students, a significant teaching load, and then diverse student body and teaching institutions, very high teaching load. So if you love teaching, I would encourage you to start to think through what size institution you might like and what type of institution you might like. So in terms of types of faculty jobs, the rank matters. So when you're looking at openings, you want to look for assistant professor. That's the entry level for faculty jobs. Once you have been in a job, typically for 6 or 7 years, and you have produced a record that is meaningful to that institution, maybe research, maybe teaching, you'll be promoted. Hopefully, you'll go up for promotion and tenure, and you'll be promoted to associate professor. At that point, you'll have tenure. If you've received tenure. And then you can also be promoted to professor down the road if you have additional contributions. There are also continuing contract positions, so teaching professor, research professor, clinical professor, with or without ranks, instructor, lecturer, and then there are limited term contracts like visiting assistant professor or VAP. You may hear some of your friends and colleagues talk about that. That's another option for you. Okay. And adjunct jobs. Let me just share with you, I looked up a study by the American Association of University Professors to determine how many positions were limited term contract or VAPs or adjunct positions. Of every single faculty job in the US, 68% are adjunct and visiting at this point in our history. So that tells us that there are fewer tenure track jobs out there now, which we knew, but that it is financially beneficial to institutions to start to hire adjuncts because they're cheaper. Okay, so we are right on time for our panel discussion. I would like to introduce Irene Reed, who is in the Department of Biology at the University of St. Joseph, which she'll talk about, but which is a 4-year college in Connecticut that focuses on teaching, and Adam Slez in the Department of Sociology here at UVA, who is currently the Director of Graduate Studies for Sociology. And I will let them introduce themselves further. Let's see if I can do this. All right, and Sam, take it away.
Well, I want to start by reiterating we are so thankful, Irene and Adam, both of you for joining us today. As the PhD Plus team has been talking about the Future Faculty Series for the past several, not even weeks, but months, it was really important to us that we had multiple perspectives that were going to be represented. That's types of universities that Melanie just spoke to, types of departments, academic training, et cetera, and having all that represented in this conversation. So with that in mind, I'm going to share a couple details and stuff to kind of kick us off after you do introductions. But in terms of introductions, I'd love to have you just share your names, titles, preferred pronouns, a little bit about your academic professional background. And if you want, I'd love to have you share a little bit about your own job search, process, what it was like, if I can take you back to those moments to kick us off. And Adam, would it be okay? I'll toss this one to you to do the introduction, and then we'll go to Irene.
Sure. Can everybody hear me? Am I coming through? All right. So my name is Adam Slez. As Melanie mentioned, I am an associate professor in the Department of Sociology here at UVA. I'm also our director of graduate studies. My preferred pronouns are he and his. And just to give you a little sense of my background, I went to Ohio Wesleyan University, which is a small liberal arts school in Delaware, Ohio. And then I went to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin. I went straight through. I often describe my decision about going to graduate school as the least informed decision I ever made. I truly was under-professionalized. My undergraduate advisor literally had a stroke as I was applying for programs, so sort of really did not know what was going on there. Did manage to make it through thanks to a very hospitable department in Madison. And I should also sort of preface this by saying, I started in 2003, which was sort of a different time for graduate education. Times to degree were a little bit longer. I came in without guaranteed funding, and they were sort of okay with you hanging around as long as you could deal with a little bit of precariousness and funding. And then after that, I had a postdoc at Princeton for 2 years before starting here at UVA. And so my job market experience, I had the displeasure of starting on the market in 2009, right after the recession. So I saw friends have job talks literally canceled the day before the job, and they just said it was canceled. It didn't happen. So that was my initial foray into the job market, was in sort of the recession period, and I did not get a job my first time around. Second try, I got a postdoc, which was 2 years. I did apply selectively my first year on the postdoc, and then went big again in the final year of the postdoc, and that got me the job here at UVA, where I've been since 2013. And since being here, I think I've been on. We've hired dedicated tenure track lines in the department 5 times, if I remember this correctly. There might have also been a couple joint hires in there, but of the 5 searches that we've done, I've been on those committees, the hiring committee, 3 times, and the last time around I was the chair. So I've seen a fair amount of hiring going on since sort of starting here. And I think the last question for intro was about what type of institution we are and what type of students we work with. So UVA, as you know, is the flagship for the state of Virginia. So this is, an R1 university. We have undergraduate, graduate, professional students. So it's very, very competitive in that regard. I'll just sort of say that most of my work is primarily teaching graduate students. And so a lot of my orientation then is very much sort of thinking about tenure track jobs and those types of things. But since taking over as director of graduate studies, one of the things I've been trying to be very upfront about is that alt-ac jobs, which is a whole separate discussion, those are not second-tier jobs. These are not Plan B jobs. I think it's really important for people hiring and people on the market to sort of be attentive to the full landscape of jobs. So I just sort of want to throw that out there, that even though we will be focusing on R1 jobs today, I don't want this to sound like it's at the expense of other types of jobs, which may actually be better jobs for life, career, and so on. But I'll leave those discussions to Melanie and Sam, who do a great job with all of that.
Yeah, I was going to say that is not an uncommon sentiment that we hear from postdocs and graduate students as they're moving forward in the academic job search. They are obviously keeping in mind postdoc opportunities, but other career opportunities as well. So thank you, Adam, for hitting on that. Irene, I'd love for you to kind of give the same introduction, and let me know if you have any questions about some of the multiple parts of this as well, too.
Sure. Everybody hear me okay? So hi, everybody. I'm Irene Reed. I'm currently the chair of biology at the University of St. Joseph, which is near Hartford, Connecticut. And I've been the chair there since fall of 2020. And my preferred pronouns are she and hers. I have a bachelor's degrees in biology and also another bachelor's degree in forensic science from the University of New Haven, which is relatively, I'd say, a medium-sized liberal arts university, and my PhD from UConn Health in biomedical science with a concentration in molecular biology and biochemistry, and my research forte is cancer biology. So as I was finishing up my PhD, I didn't really know what I was going to do. So I applied for a lot of different jobs. I was considering postdocs, of course, I was considering sales jobs in biotech. I was thinking about going back into forensic science and becoming a certified forensic scientist. But as I was getting my PhD at UConn, the UConn graduate campus and undergraduate campus are really far away from each other. So as a graduate student, I wasn't obligated to be a TA, but I opted to apply for an adjunct position at the University of St. Joseph, where I am now, because it's about 10 minutes down the road from where I was doing my PhD. And I was interested in kind of trying teaching out. So it was kind of nice because I got paid for it. And I kind of, for 3 years during my PhD, I was teaching general biology and microbiology labs. And that, even though I was kind of still on the fence what I wanted to do, that really pushed me towards a teaching career. And so when I was finishing up my PhD, I had some teaching experience. I didn't have a postdoc, so I was kind of rolling the dice with jobs. I actually applied for a postdoc and lots of teaching positions. And I ended up, after many rejections and kind of interviews and maybes, I ended up getting a visiting assistant professor position. So those VAT positions at the University of St. Joseph. Some of it was serendipitous. I mean, I had been there, kind of proven myself. Also, they had somebody resign late in the year. So it all kind of fell together. But that being said, I've been there. This would be my 15th year, and I've worked my way up from adjunct to full professor and chair. So I feel like even if my opportunity was a little bit of luck, I've really earned my keep over my time there. In terms of hiring as a department chair, I have chaired 3 tenure-track faculty searches within my own department. I also chaired a search for a high-up administrative position called a registrar at the university. I've served on several other committees for faculty members outside of my department. And just since I've been chair over the last 4 years, I've hired 21 adjunct faculty members. So a lot of experience looking at applications. And to kind of wrap up the introduction, I wanted to talk a little bit about the type of institution that USJ is, because it's a lot different than UVA. And so we're what's called a teaching focused institution. And if you kind of break down your job role into teaching and research and service, I'd say we're about like 60 to 70% teaching, 20 to 30% research, and 10 to 15% service, which means serving on committees, doing community outreach, things like that. And going into this position, I think one big misconception is if you go to a teaching-focused institution or some institutions known as PUIs, which is primarily undergraduate institution, that you can't do research. And that is absolutely not the case. I'm very active in research. The big difference is we have less facilities, less funding, and we're primarily mentoring undergraduate students or sometimes early graduate students like master's students. At our university, we don't have a PhD program, but some universities that are similar in size do. But primarily, we're working with kind of newer student populations to higher education. And so it just changes the scope of your research. We're not getting R1 grants. We're getting grants from foundations, organizations, smaller grants from NIH and NSF, but we're still really active. Our students are applying for funding, publishing, presenting. It's just kind of the scale that's different. I even integrate research into the classroom in things called CUREs, which are called course-based undergraduate research experiences. So students can do research in a classroom setting as well. And so there's a lot of options to integrate your passion for research into a teaching career. So the answers to the questions today will be from my perspective of kind of a smaller, but doesn't necessarily have to be a small institution, but a liberal arts focused institution that values research and scholarship, but is primarily focused on teaching. And the size of these institutions ranges from small to even medium or large size. So it just depends on what you're looking for. Thanks.
Well, thank you both for the introductions. I can't wait to dive in a little bit more to hear about your experience serving on those panels. And just to give kind of a couple quick numbers too for our audience so they can have these in mind. As we've been talking to Adam and Irene, kind of preparing for this, I know the audience is very familiar with UVA because obviously they're a part of the university, but specifically the Department of Sociology has approximately 25 faculty members or thereabouts, I believe, Adam, about 30 or so graduate students. And I think we're graduating somewhere around 80 undergraduates who are majoring in sociology per year. That, of course, doesn't include concentrations, minors, other things as well, too. But just so our audience has a little bit of idea about that. And then for the University of St. Joseph in Connecticut, about 2,500 enrolled students, I believe, total for the university or thereabouts. Within Irene's department, specifically the Department of Biology, about a dozen faculty members, not necessarily including some of the educational instructors. And Irene, I believe that you said there's about 70 biology majors in total, graduating about 15 per year. But there's a lot of undergraduate bachelor's to pre-med and therapy and some of those other programs as well too. So there's a lot more students potentially there too at the undergraduate level. But I just thought that would help, all our participants think about like how many faculty members can be involved because of the scale of the departments, and also the number of students and stuff that are reached within the departments. Now, to kind of kick us off, I know the two of you are aware we have some prepared questions. We'll dive through a little bit of each of those and alternate kind of back and forth. And for the audience to know, really our focus for this first conversation is demystifying what happens behind closed doors at institutions. So the things kind of leading up to the actual stage where they would be inviting you in as a candidate to interview for a phone interview or a virtual interview. We're going to kind of stop the conversation there because we're going to host future panel discussions on the interview process, kind of that selection, job talks, other things as well too. So as our audience is interested in asking questions, try to focus this a little bit on the front half of this process for us. And with that in mind, Irene, I'm going to ask you to go first in answering this, and then Adam to kind of add on. Our first question is, how does your institution or department approach identifying future faculty needs and how they're kind of thinking about the positions they're hiring for?
Great, thanks. Yeah, so our need for faculty members is completely driven by courses that we need coverage for and enrollments. So as Sam mentioned, we have a certain number of majors in the department, but we also teach classes for a large variety of other majors. So if there's growth in, say, the nursing major or health science majors, then we also need additional biology faculty. And so we also may hire someone if somebody leaves the university or retires, but if I want to hire someone, I have to submit a data-driven request, and that is based on kind of the amount of teaching that we have and the need for, that. That's what drives it. But since we're a department of biology, we have diverse faculty members. So since we're a smaller institution, we're not divided into neuroscience and ecology, right? We're all in one department. So we have virologists, we have cancer biologists, environmental scientists, all working together. So once we identify our teaching needs, we try to recruit faculty that will complement the research interests and expertise that we have in the department. And so that's going to be different depending on the institution you're looking at. You may have a really specialized department versus a broader department. So that's really going to determine what they're looking for in terms of kind of scholarship and background. But the primary driving force for us is teaching and enrollments.
Adam.
Yes, this sort of work. I mean, I think we have similar concerns, but maybe difference in emphasis here. And the one thing I'll sort of say is that sort of hiring can work in two directions. There's what I would describe as a bottom-up model, in which it's the department saying this is what we want. And then there's also a top-down model in which the university has initiatives saying this is what they want. And so every year we do submit a hiring plan. There's no guarantee of what that will look like. And that's sort of the bureaucratic manifestation of the bottom-up model. But oftentimes we get approached about, say, cluster hires, joint hires, things like that, which we might sort of jump onto as a way of getting a hire that we might not otherwise get. And so we have similar concerns about things like teaching, but I would say research is probably the primary driver from the perspective of the department. But we also have consistent demands from the university in terms of enrollments. And so I would say faculty opinion is divided on this, on how much to prioritize teaching needs as the basis for hiring. But what I will say about this is that anytime we hire someone in a particular research area, it could be that we want to sort of support an area that we already have interest in. Sometimes we will consciously say we want to build into new areas. Sometimes cluster hires become the mechanism for doing that. But anytime that we're hiring for a particular area of research, there is almost always an expectation that you can teach in that area. So even if the teaching demand is not the driving force, the concern about teaching is always going to sneak back in there for determining, interest, hiring, and so on.
Well, Adam, you teed up the next question really well, because we want to talk to you a little bit about how the universities or schools kind of approach this process. So that's in essence the question. How does your institution or department approach the hiring process? Specifically thinking about things like cluster hires, maybe individual hires, joint appointments. What does that landscape look like at UVA and then University of St. Joseph? Adam.
Didn't intend to tee it up. Now I'm looking back at my answers and figuring that I give the wrong answer to the wrong question, but the two are related. And so, I mean, the thing about this is that a lot of, in the interest of demystifying the hiring process, right? From the perspective of applicants, you sort of don't know what's going on. And universities are complex organizations, and it's easy to imagine that it's just about the department you're hiring or that you're applying to, but that we have limits on how much say we have in terms of who we're looking for. And I think that that's changed a little bit at UVA over time. Sometimes there is what I would describe as a Hunger Games-like scenario in which there's actually plenty of money available, but it is made available through competitive offerings. And so this leads to like labs and initiatives. UVA loves interdisciplinary stuff. And so that often becomes the basis for hiring. And so we just did a hire. We just did 2 hires actually last year, one of which I had forgotten about that in my count of hires. But both of those had affiliations with other departments. They are, and I want to be clear about the difference between joint appointments versus cluster hires. Like one of the things that is something like a joint appointment, in my mind, this is where you are sort of basically 50-50, which is not the same thing as sort of having an affiliation. And so, for example, we just hired someone for environmental sociology who their tenure home is unambiguously within sociology. But there is, in a sense, money and opportunities available for them to collaborate with sort of these an environmental initiative on grounds. The other hire actually does have some teaching commitments in another department. And so these things vary. The department does not have control over them. We can either take the opportunity or not. But these opportunities are sometimes mixed blessings in the sense that you get aligned, but you are hiring someone who potentially has divided commitments, which can be hard, particularly when doing hiring for junior faculty who, just so you know, whenever anybody hires you, they want you to get tenure. That's one of the things that we're looking for in applications is tenurability. And so it is hard for us to help tenure you if you're having to spend time in departments that basically are not going to have a say and like not have a huge say in your tenure case. So that's the mixed blessing that comes with the increasing tendency towards joint and cluster hires. I think there is growing recognition that like truly divided appointments are hard because a lot of faculty simply don't have the time to do both of those things well. So we try to manage that. When possible, I think the preference would be for sort of the more bottom-up strategy in which we tell the university what we need and sort of go accordingly. The sort of extreme version of this would be a preference for open hires where there's literally no substantive preference and we simply look for the best candidate in the field. That can also be challenging. So there's sometimes divides around that in the sense that if you go open rank, hiring looks a little bit apples to oranges. So short answer here is we get what we can and then try to make that work with whatever our needs are. And so that's what's happening in the background is like when you see the ad, there's a lot of stuff going on behind it and departments are going to try to make that work for whatever they actually need on the ground.
And Irene, from your perspective and the hiring committees you've served on, how's that process played out at your university?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's a little different, and maybe it has to do with the size of the university or the fact that we're not research driven, we're almost always exclusively hiring one faculty member at a time. Now, in any given year, we might have 9 or 10 or 12 searches, but they're all separate search committees, all separate departments. Sometimes a department will do more than one hire, but that's really out of necessity. Like, let's say 2 people just suddenly retired or resigned, and we have to replace them. But typically, we're doing one search at a time. We have sometimes had joint appointments. It's not super common. There's a few faculty members that have joint appointments, but again, it typically tends to not benefit the faculty or the department. So we do try to avoid that. Each of our committees usually has 5 to 6 faculty members, including one from outside the department. So that's important. I think one kind of big difference from what Adam was saying is that we have usually a very specific kind of candidate in mind, and we need to really craft a job ad around that. Like we very rarely have open rank searches. We rarely have kind of like, who's the best candidate? I wish we did. I mean, that would be amazing. But like I said earlier, I have to really justify to the administration exactly what we need and why. And that can sometimes come full circle and hurt us, because if we don't get a candidate that fits what we said we need, but we really like someone, we have to really try to justify why we should hire them and say no, but even though they don't check this box, here's why we think that they would be good. We also almost always are hiring VAPs or assistant professors, unless there's been a bunch of failed searches or there's a grant or something to support a higher rank hire. We almost always start at the lowest ranks, and that is purely driven by budget. If we have somebody resign, it's almost always a VAP hire for the next year, no matter what, because they want to bring on someone and kind of test the waters before they commit to a tenure track position. But knowing that, don't discount VAP positions, because a lot of them are posted because of the budget cycle. Maybe somebody left after the budget was approved, so they can't actually approve another tenure track line, but the intent is to turn that into a tenure track position. So definitely don't discount VAP positions, because many times they can lead to tenure track appointments. That's exactly what happened to me and others in my department. No guarantees there. Some of them really are just temporary for some reason, like someone's out for 2 years and then coming back. But usually it has to do with timing and budget, why there's a VAP. So you're hopeful that if you go and do that, things will change and you could possibly stay there. And at the very worst case scenario, if you have a VAP position that only lasts a year or two, then you're that much more competitive for tenure track positions if you leave that institution.
And for our in-person audience, I don't think you're actually able to see Adam nodding as Irene was talking a little bit. Adam, maybe real quick, the similarities with the visiting assistant professor kind of hiring / strategy. Is that true in 30 seconds or less?
I will say that we haven't hired a VAP since I've been here, and what is happening is that we now have AGFM. So we have basically, and this is something that's really important to recognize, is that not all teaching track jobs are the same, and there are some that basically have career ladders and stability. And so we tend not to replace tenure track lines with, say, AGFMs, but we have had teaching track lines come up. So my experience with hiring is overwhelmingly with tenure track lines, overwhelmingly for assistant professors. We have had some open rank searches, but it's almost always been APs. The path to hiring for our teaching faculty has been completely different. So that's one that I have not been on the committees for that. And in some cases, those folks have been hired as part of spousal retention packages, and it does require, there's still a process to that, but we have also done national searches for folks who are now on our permanent teaching track faculty. So it does exist for us, but the VAP route is not one that we have seen a lot, at least in our department.
Thank you for kind of diving into that. I think it's fun in having these conversations where we can kind of see some divergence. And I think our next question might kind of speak a little bit more to that as well, too. And Irene, you did a great job in your introduction, kind of teeing this up too as well. So for both of you, how do you determine what qualifications, whether they're required qualifications or preferred qualifications, to stress when you're crafting that position description? Irene, I'm asking you to go first, and I'll just highlight, yesterday in our conversation, we talked a little bit about expectations for the universities or departments to have postdoc experience, teaching experience, like your 3+ years before coming into the university. What are those requirements for each of your institutions? How much, where, as much as you can speak to? I'll pitch it to you.
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned in my intro, our job ads are primarily tailored around the expertise we're seeking with the ability to teach certain topics. But again, flexibility can really be beneficial here. So I think I think my answer is gonna differ a lot from Adam's in terms of what we're looking for in our job ads. But I also think this is different than kind of your typical experience as a graduate student or postdoc, where you are taught to be an expert in a very narrow area. If you are looking at kind of smaller institutions in general, teaching focused institutions, your strength will actually be in your diversity of being able to teach different things, or at least your willingness to. I'll put it that way. I've taught a lot of things that I would not consider are my area of expertise. My first year teaching, I was hired 1 month before, or 3 weeks before the start date, and I was teaching 100+ students in general biology, okay, but then a graduate epidemiology course. That was what was left, and they needed somebody to teach it. Not my area, but you have to kind of fly by the seat of your pants a little bit. For us at our size institution, we usually say a postdoc is preferred but not required. So that's going to be really different than a research institution and maybe some larger institutions that span more of kind of the R1 realm. However, we are expecting a fair amount of teaching experience, and it's hard to put a number on this. I would say my best advice is, if you can adjunct somewhere, that's the best, because you're actually have a formal teaching appointment and you're a contracted employee and you have specific classes you're teaching. But don't discount other types of experience, anything where you're mentoring students in a lab, if you've been a teaching assistant, you have leadership in educational outreach programs, all of that stuff counts as teaching. So don't shortchange yourself if you've had other experiences that aren't formal teaching appointments. There's also a lot of great options for kind of certifications out there that are, involved with pedagogy, course design. A lot of them are free or like very little cost. There's specific ones out there for teaching online versus course development. And even doing some of those things can really bolster up your resume or your CV in terms of teaching experience if you don't have a lot of formal teaching experience. But on the other side of that coin, we're also looking for someone who's active in scholarship. So that's going to be in our job ad as well. And so the biggest thing, and I'll touch on this more, I think, in some of the later questions in more detail, but the important thing is being able to bring your research to a smaller institution with more limited funding and more limited time. So, you can start thinking about ways that you can adapt your research if you found yourself with less time and resources. And one thing that we might shy away from is when we get applications of someone who's proposing, really large projects requiring expensive specialized equipment. And if they're not bringing their own funding in, we may tend to kind of shy away from moving those applicants forward.
Thank you. Adam.
Yeah, so I think my answer would be in terms of qualifications, it's going to depend again a little bit on whether it's sort of bottom up, meaning initiated by our department, versus top down, meaning it's coming from a university initiative. And if it's coming from a university initiative, we don't always have total control on what qualifications we're asking for. And typically for us, qualifications are going to mean a PhD, but we do not necessarily require a postdoc. And then teaching, I'll talk about that in a second. But for us, the qualifications are typically what substantive areas you work in. One thing I should state up front about sociology is I can't speak to say like biology or the natural sciences, but even compared to other social sciences, sociology is massive in terms of its number of subfields. Like most people actually belong to 2 or 3 subfields, and the boundaries are exceedingly porous. And so this creates a little bit of flexibility where if you think about hiring as a matching process between potential employee and the employer, we're both trying to leverage that flexibility to make ourselves fit, right? And so if it's a top-down thing where we don't have full control, we can use some of the porousness of the discipline to try to get candidates who look as close to what we might have done if we had been in charge of the hiring process ourselves, right? So we can sort of approximate what we want because of the flexibility within the discipline. And so typically, again, what that means is we will list the areas we want. Sometimes we might not be allowed to do an open hire, but we can put a lot of different areas with mixed results, because sometimes that creates confusion on the part of applicants in terms of what we're really looking for. And so one thing I want to highlight to all of you is please understand that the people employing you are fallible in the way they write job ads. And so there's cases where it's a mistake for us to list 8 areas or whatever we've done. I don't think it was ever quite that bad. But so typically the qualifications that we're listing are almost always going to be about substantive areas. On occasion, we have had specific requirements for methods, and that's actually how I got hired. Was the ad was actually for someone focusing substantively on stratification, but someone who could teach statistics. I am a strange person in sociology in the sense that I'm a historical sociologist who actually does a lot of statistics. And so I actually fit what the department does really, really well in terms of the historical part, but I could also teach statistics. And so on occasion, when we have those specific teaching demands, and this came because someone was moving jobs basically within the university, and so we no longer had anyone to teach statistics. That's how this job came about. We sometimes have more specific requirements where the teaching demands might be higher. In general, when it comes to teaching, the thing that's happened is graduate funding has changed radically, and so it's not the case that you can guarantee that everyone has semesters and semesters of TAing for like a decade the way it did when I was applying for jobs. Is that many people actually can get through graduate school with only TAing once or twice. And so because of that, we can't have an expectation of an extensive track record in teaching for many of the students who are going to be the most competitive on a research front, because they're going to top institutions, guaranteed funding, limited teaching. And so a complete absence of teaching would be a red flag, but we don't necessarily expect students to have already taught their own class. The big thing that I would say to all of you is, like, if you're worried, like, oh, I don't have enough teaching experience, there are ways to get it, but very often on the fly, the trick is to just be able to say how you would teach something. And this is a lot of what the job process is can you think on your feet and explain how you would do something that you hadn't done before, which is exactly what your entire first year on the tenure track is anyway. And so we have hired people who may not have taught in an area, but have been given exceedingly thoughtful answers on how they might teach in an area. In the case of something like statistics, I can say that we were looking for more concrete experience in that case, just because the technical demands were pretty specific. And so in that case, like, we did give preference to people who had prior experience in the classroom teaching statistics. As far as postdocs go, we don't ever require that, but the advantage of a postdoc is largely time, in the sense that you've had a chance to step away from the dissertation. You can often articulate a research agenda in a way that you can't when your entire research agenda is the dissertation. You've also had chances for things to move along in the publication process. So postdocs are not required, but they implicitly create an advantage for many candidates. So we've ended up hiring lots of people with postdocs, even though that was not explicitly required.
I'll just note that, yeah, we know that there are disciplinary differences between expectations for postdocs, even within social science fields, natural science fields that I come from, et cetera. So if you're sitting in the audience and you're going, well, that's not true for my discipline, you know, that we recognize that there are a lot of differences here. So I want to move us forward to talk a little bit more about the evaluation process, and being sensitive of time, I am going to combine these two questions. I'll let you take them in a little bit different direction as well too. So as we move forward, I'd like to hear a little bit about how you personally approach evaluating applications. Feel free to contrast that against other people that you have been on hiring committees with, if you hear about other people approaching it very different than you. And then as you do that, I'm curious, as you think about how you approach it, if there are things that jump out, alignment with the university, kind of fit, core values of the university you reflect in the materials, feel free to call those out as examples. Or if you see like things you might deem as like a red flag, like a lack of alignment, something it doesn't speak. And Irene, I think you already kind of hit on one of these a little bit earlier in an answer. Feel free to chime in on those too. So Adam, let me pitch it to you for a succinct answer to this as best you can, how you approach it, how others do, and things that have stuck out to you in committees in the past.
Yep. One thing I'll say is that, at least in the last time that we did hiring, the university basically said we could not request materials that we were not going to look at. And so this is a lot of places have stopped requesting full application materials up front. And so things like letters come later in the process sometimes now. So I think that's worth noting in terms of this limits what we can look at on the initial pass. So for me, the big thing is like, I want to know if someone actually works in the area. No matter how good you are, I want to know if you're actually working in the area we are hiring in. And some people don't care what area you actually work in. They just want the best person. They're trying to fake an open hire at all times. Personally, I don't approach it that way. I'm like, if we're hiring an area, we need you to teach somewhere, I need to know that you actually work in that field. And so the first place I'm going to always start. So the three things I look at are CV, cover letter, and then I will take a brief pass at whatever writing sample you turned in. Cover letter may be the most important, because particularly with junior scholars, sometimes stuff is not not all things have made it to publication. And so the CV may not be the best indication of where stuff is going. So I'm always going to read the cover letter first. Since we're an R1 institution, most of the cover letters we get are going to focus on research primarily. So that's typically like the first 2 or 3 paragraphs. That's where I'm going to get a clear sense of what your profile is, whether you're a fit. I'll then look at what your sort of pipeline looks like in the CV, and then I'll check out the writing sample to see whether the work looks interesting. And by interesting, I mean, like, both do I like it, but also do I think it's going to like fit with what I know people in my department like. And checking the research will really help provide validation for whether you do or do not fit in a given area. And so we've had people, I'll just sort of say that I've had people submit writing samples, which were perfectly fine writing samples, but did not demonstrate competence in the area we were hiring. And I just had to set the person aside as like, it wouldn't be fair to consider this because you haven't really demonstrated what we're asking for, no matter how good you are, things like that. So that's where I start with things. Stuff like letters, I will look at later. But the thing with letters is that most people don't write bad letters. And so lots and lots of good information in a letter is okay. The absence of good information is sometimes more telling. But you do but I do check those to read closely, but there's sort of a whole genre of middle of the road letters that actually don't say much. Some people prioritize them more because they're looking for social connections. Like, is this person getting high prestige writers? I don't personally, that's not really how I go for things, but I do want to be attentive to the fact that people do look at letters that way.
And Adam was a really nice plug in there for everybody who's participating in this series. Our next session, June 20th, is on CVs and cover letters and emphasizing the cover letter part of that. So make sure you attend. Adam said it was important. Irene, how about you?
I'm going to echo that. Actually, for our last search, and not all of the searches at my institution are doing this, but we actually only asked for a CV and what we called an extended cover letter. So 2 pages that gave, your cover letter plus like a little snippet of kind of your, teaching and research philosophy with some, if applicable, like DEI woven into there. And then we moved candidates to the next round and asked for more formalized writing samples and statements. So for us, I'd say the cover letter is the most important because that's where you can really tailor it to the institution. Applying for jobs is a ton of work. It's so much work. And I think one of our red flags is when it is totally clear that a candidate has sent the same exact cover letter to every job they're applying for. It's obvious. I know you might not think it is, but it's really obvious. And to us, we are looking for that attention to detail. We're looking for somebody who's going to put the care into, and we understand that you're probably not going to have a different teaching statement or writing sample or research statement for every job you apply for, but a cover letter is a very easy thing to tailor parts of it to a specific job. You're not going to change your CV, like those things, you're going to do one draft and, you might have to tweak. But I agree that the cover letter, and again, because you can't always get the full picture from the CV, I'll also say without trying to sound too obvious, so I apologize, I don't mean to offend anyone, but I have to say it because I've seen it so much. The first impression is key. There are so many cases where the directions for the application are not followed. Someone includes something that wasn't requested. Somebody doesn't include something that was requested. Things like this really deter us from the start because it shows that you can't read and follow directions. And again, I don't mean to be offensive, but I see it so much that I just wanted to mention it in this session. Pay attention to what they're asking for. Little things like putting all your materials together into one PDF file can go a long way. Sure, maybe it's not required, but if we have to open up 16 different files of all different formats of JPEGs and Word docs and PDFs, it's really laborious for the search committee, and it's not giving a good impression that you put some time and care into your materials. So obviously the content is the most important thing, but just those little touches can, make a really big difference. And of course, we're looking for alignment with the job description, which is where you can tailor that cover letter. Let's say you don't perfectly fit the job description. Tell us why you still think you would be a good fit for this job. That's your opportunity to do that. And then in terms of institutional fit, we're looking for evidence of teaching, whether it's formal, informal, evidence of mentorship. We're a really kind of student-driven institution. We're completely enrollment-based, so we need folks who are going to care about the students and their outcomes. And so if we don't see any of that, and it's all just about like, here's how many papers I've published, here's my research agenda, then it's going to be a red flag for us personally. We care about that stuff to an extent, but we also want to see kind of the personal side of you. And as I mentioned before, another big red flag for us would be if you're proposing to do things that are like totally outside the realm of what you could do at our institution. We just feel like we wouldn't be able to support you. So we probably wouldn't move you forward to the next stage.
I think kind of playing on that a little bit, and Adam, I'll kick it back to you because I know you want to follow up as well too. That real important aspect of coming across genuine and alignment, having fit with the university and the cover letter is so important. And I would just really, really quickly caution you from using things like AI to help craft letters, because if they start to look similar with other applicants, all of a sudden it can start to raise some really big red flags. put time, care, effort into crafting your materials and make sure that they're personal and coming from you for two reasons. One is you don't want people thinking in the back of their head, hey, this looks a lot like this one, and counting that against you. And you also want to make sure when you make it to the interview stage that those are your words, that's your intention, alignment with the person that they see in front of them, answering the same way. Because if that doesn't happen, that can also cause a lot of issues when you get to those interview stages. You want to come across as your words and very genuine. Adam.
Yeah, so I have some quick responses both to Irene and Sam, but overall, my sentiment is one of 100%. The lesson here on the cover letter is just exactly right. And just remember that for like hiring committees, we're looking at, sometimes more hundreds of applications, right? So unfortunately, we do not have all the time in the world to look through all of your materials to figure out, you could be the perfect person, but if you don't display that to us quickly, we just do not have the time to get there. And so truly, like the first 2 or 3 paragraphs of the cover letter are going to do so much work for you for signaling what kind of sort of scholar, employee, et cetera, that you are going to be. One thing I wanted to say, like the first thing I want to respond to was the issue with changing things for different jobs. There are limits. I will say that there are limits to this, but it is right. I have received letters that weren't even addressed. They were addressed to people in other departments. And that was like, this is just insulting. You don't want to be here. You're not getting off on the right foot if you forget to change what university, title appears in there. You also want to be attentive, particularly to big distinctions. If it's, teaching versus research, your research cover letter should not look like the letters you're sending to teaching jobs. I went to a small liberal arts school. At some point, I started applying for liberal arts school jobs and went out of my way to be clear about my background, that this was not a second option for me. This was something that I was very serious. So I very clearly went out of my way to write those letters. The places where I see limitations in tailoring is that is not on the big things, like do you fit the job? But sometimes when you don't know about the organization you're applying to or the institution or what's going on in a department. And sometimes I see people in a sense, trying to overstate their fit by like naming people that they want to work with or saying, I want to work with this. And it's like, that can backfire because you don't know who's on the committee. And you could basically be listing the enemies of the people who are hiring. And you're like, oh, this person wants to be with all the people I hate. I'm not saying that's, we all love each other here, right? That's not happening, of course. But like, truly, you don't know what you're saying when you start listing people. Also, when you start saying, I would love to work with these people, that's not signaling like a scholar like being like, I want a job as an independent scholar, or like your job in the cover letter is to signal your independent trajectory. And so signaling that you want to work with people can backfire because it's sort of a little bit more like what you would have done for a graduate school application. So that's my only caveat on tailoring, is you want to be a little bit careful if you're just guessing about institutions and then trying to make it seem like you fit. So that's the caveat there. The AI point, I just want to sort of share something from, it's actually from historical sociologist Paul MacLean. Paul MacLean wrote a book about letter writing in sort of 14th century Florence. And so it's all about basically people writing to like the Medici, trying to get patronage. And the whole thing was about the style of letters. And the conclusion of the book was amazing because this was pre-AI, but Paul starts talking about in old versions of Word, there used to be, like Clippy would show up and say, hey, do you want to do a resume? And the problem was not that there's a template, right? It's like everyone could do this, but the problem that you have to know the rules of the genre. When you write a cover letter, it has to look like a cover letter. But if it looks too much like everyone else's cover letter, then there is a problem, right? And so that's how successful cover letters work, is that you show that you understand the genre, but you are also able to differentiate yourself in a way that makes it clear why you are uniquely suited for it. So that's the thing to think about, is like, what are the rules of the genre, and how do I and if necessary, how do I strategically break them to signal that I am the person for this job?
We had one more question and then kind of a take-home question as well too. I do want to acknowledge that if somebody has a burning question that is in the audience, please let Fatima and Melanie know. We'll give you a second to be able to answer that. And with that, I'm going to ask that the answers to this next question be kind of short. And with that, I'm not even sure if you'll really be able to dive into this because we might not know. But the reason we're asking these questions is we've had a lot of postdocs and graduate students that are thinking about both fellowships and faculty careers. And they're really curious how, Supreme Court decisions and how those might impact universities to change or adapt the way they've approached things like diversity statements in the past in this next upcoming cycle. So I'm curious, I'm going to give this to you first, Irene, because you already touched on it in terms of how your university approaches incorporating things related to DEI into the application itself. And then I'm curious, how do you think that may or may not change in the coming year or two?
Yeah, so I think we've already seen some of the changes. I was checking some of our recent job postings just in preparation for this. The last search I did was just last year, so it wasn't very long ago, but even just this year, it looks like nobody is requiring separate DEI statements anymore. And I think that may be a result of what we're seeing, the fallout of that. But we are really looking for candidates to weave DEI principles into their teaching and research statements. So in terms of teaching, how would you create an inclusive classroom? How would you create equity in your classroom? In terms of research, how are you going to provide opportunities for diverse students or diverse learners in the research setting? So that's what we're really kind of emphasizing. And that can come through not only in a cover letter, but also in your teaching and research statements. So we've actually moved away from DEI statements. I don't know if that's going to change. I think this is an area of a lot of mystery in the job market. I think a lot of institutions require DEI statements, but don't really know what they're looking for in that statement. So I'd say try to link your DEI principles and application to the things you'll actually be doing, the teaching and the research that you'll be doing.
Thank you. Adam.
Yeah, I was just looking quickly to see if we required them the last round that we did. I think that they were in there, but I generally agree with what's been said on DEI. I mean, the one thing I would just sort of, and I mentioned this yesterday, is that for those of you applying for jobs, realize that most of the people on the hiring side of things would not have been asked to write DEI statements themselves, since they just mentally don't have like a map for this the way they do for things like cover letters or even teaching statements. So like, I think what has happened though is that the norms within cover letters is that you do increasingly see candidates addressing DEI issues there anyway. And I think it's correct that where this will show up is, and these have been common DEI type statements have been within sociology for a while, so it's not, necessarily a new thing, but we see people talking about this in terms of particularly teaching or how they would contribute to diversity in the institution. It does sometimes come up places where, you will see candidates reflecting on their own experiences and their own background, which is sort of part of how these types of statements have come in with respect to, say, undergraduate and graduate admissions, which is a somewhat different setting. But otherwise, I think I agree with what Irene said.
Thank you both. Yeah, and we are going to dive further into DEI and diversity statements within our July 30th session as well too. So for everybody participating, know that we'll definitely dive deeper into the topic and have some considerations and even thinking about different types of applications that are currently on the street at that time. So we are right on time to wrap up and ask our last question. At the moment, I don't think we have any in-person or online questions that I'm seeing. So I will ask, actually, I see one that just came in. I'll ask it for Chloe real quick. And it's at Adam. Regarding tailoring cover letters and mentioning faculty, would it be okay to say that your research aligns well with or complements the research of other faculty in the department?
It's mixed. And what I mean by this is that if your research aligns with it, that will be apparent. You don't need to say that. But I don't think it's the worst thing in a letter to say, like at a general level, my research aligns with, and then maybe general interest areas. Where my concerns come up is when you sort of go too far, not you personally, where one goes too far in, say, picking individuals and saying like, I'm with this person, right? Because that can feel like taking sides depending on what type of department you're in. But my number, and if this is the last thing I say today, like for anyone applying for the job, the best way to get a job is to be the best version of yourself that you can be. It's because like you can't credibly present yourself as a different type of scholar, person, researcher than who you are. And so I'd say the thing to lean into is to lean into your own skills, attributes, and interests, and then do that. And if it lines up with the department, it'll work well. But like otherwise, you're not going to be able to fix a mismatch through careful writing. So like give the clearest statement that you can in the first two paragraphs about what type of scholar you are, what your research profile looks like, and where you're headed. And that's, I think that will do the important work that you would otherwise try to signal by saying this person or that person.
I'll say another opportunity that you may have if you're hopeful to have something like that really in your application package is, don't forget, it's not just your cover letter, your statements itself. You have champions that are submitting letters of recommendation for you. If you think it's important to make that connection and really call that out, coach your letter writers and have one of them actually state that for you. Sometimes it comes across much better to have them state it than to have you actually put it within your own materials. The final question that I have for our two panelists today is, it's a little bit of a softball, so you can take it in any way you want, but what recommendations, maybe 2 or 3, do you have for applicants for framing their materials for your type of institution? What are your top 2, maybe 3? Adam, I've got you going first for this one.
So top 2 recommendations for tailoring it for us. I mean, I think I probably already said this repeatedly. It's just as early and as often as possible, tell us what kind of work you're doing and be concrete. And this is something you'll have a whole separate section on cover letters, but the way that a lot of like cover letter writing works is you're sort of in the first 2 paragraphs making a general statement and then sort of repeating that, but filling it in with concrete evidence of the type of work you are doing and will be doing. And so it's be as clear and concrete as you can. Sometimes you get general statements of, I'm interested in these subfields. I'm like, well, that's great. That's a first pass for sort of signaling that you might fit the job. But I really want to know, what is it about you? What makes you a unique researcher? What is basically, I want to see your worldview of the discipline in as concise a statement as you can get in, say, the first 2 paragraphs. And that's the kind of thing that I feel is compelling, because that's the kind of things that I'm going to need to see from you once you start publishing, once you go up for tenure, and so on.
Irene?
Yeah, so I would kind of invoke Adam's, I loved, be the best version of yourself that you can be. Be honest and don't oversell. So if you have limited teaching experience, capitalize on any situations you've been involved in that you could demonstrate being a teacher or a mentor. Show us how you might do it. Sometimes the kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like the promise of what someone can bring, the potential that they have sometimes outweighs the actual experience that they have. Like if we think that you can envision yourself in this role and how you might approach it and you can articulate that, sometimes that's more powerful than just listing, 5 or 6 different classes that you taught without being reflective about it. So I think having that come through in the cover letter, the teaching statement is like kind of reflecting on, what would motivate you to be, a teacher. Take advantage of any opportunity to kind of professionally develop yourself. And then I would say for any position, reimagine your research, right? Not just for positions at institutions like mine. Wherever you go, there's going to be confines, there's going to be departmental kind of politics and perspectives. There's going to be different situations where you're going to have to, maybe modify the way you're approaching a project or who you're mentoring. So I encourage everybody to kind of understand what the limitations of your research are, see how you could, conduct things that you're interested, the questions you're interested in different contexts, because I think whether you're going to a institution like mine or an R1, that's a skill that will be valued if you can not be super hyper-focused on just one way of doing something. And I think that will also help with that DEI component of, showing that there's different ways that you could approach the same problem. And then my last bit of kind of tidbit is just be organized and kind of pay attention to what the job ad is looking for. I agree, tailor it, but don't go overboard, right? You don't need to name drop. You can kind of just say, when I say tailor, I mean, is it a teaching job? Is it a research job? Did you attend an institution similar to the one that you're applying to? That could be something that you could connect with the committee, kind of like Adam did with his. Same thing with me. Like I attended a small college. I wanted to have that experience where my professor knew my name. Or if it's a research institution, how does your research align with what they're looking for? And if anybody wants any suggestions on how to find these resources and things online and teaching courses and reimagine their research, they're welcome to also reach out. I'm happy to chat. So
one very brief thing is just remember that, yes, you need to appeal to people who do work like you do, but remember that the overall decision is going to be made by a whole department. So always remember there's a whole room full of people who don't necessarily do exactly what you do and don't necessarily I don't want to say agree with you. I don't want to think about it in a contentious fashion. But so as you're writing, just keep that audience in mind. And this will sort of keep you away from getting overly specific in ways that might sort of alienate people who are not sort of be able to play inside baseball in your field. So this is useful both for writing, but also when you do campus visits and have to talk to people who aren't actually in your area.
Well, you both set us up really well to be able to say this too. We have a fantastic group at UVA, the Center for Teaching Excellence, who we partner with a lot. There's some great resources and ways to gain experience and even think about your teaching statements, and another plug for an upcoming session. So if you're not already aware of the Center for Teaching Excellence, even if you're not teaching, but you can gain some of the skills and a little bit of insight as you go through one of their workshops. Make sure you at least look at the website, see if there's opportunities there. Our panelists have been amazing today, Adam and Irene. We can't thank you enough. Please join me in giving them a round of applause if you're in person or online. We know also that there are probably questions that you all have that we didn't get to. If you want, feel free to put them in the chat. Share them with Melanie and Fatima if you're in the crowd. We'll try to compile some of those questions, and whether Adam or Irene can help us answer them, or we try to answer them and respond based on the conversation we just had. We'll try to capture all those and share those back out with all of our participants. So keep the questions coming. And with that, I'm going to toss the mic back to Melanie. Please feel free to take over, and thanks for the extra time that I ate up in our agenda.
So thank you so much to Adam and Irene for everything that they shared with us, because I think it's totally relevant. In fact, one of the statements that I think it was Adam just said, know your audience. So who's your audience? Your future colleagues, for sure. So is it helpful to know what your future colleagues do, in terms of their research, in terms of what they teach? Sure. But I think Irene and Adam had such great perspectives that they shared about how you can tailor your materials to be really relevant. Know your future opportunities, thinking about potential classes you could teach, thinking about where your research is going, anything that you can do to set yourself apart is important. And knowing the students. So is it a minority serving institution? Is it a very small state school in Kentucky? What is the enrollment like? And is the future department in need of a certain course to be taught? So be sure to do your research. And institutional priorities should inform everything that you write. So I wanted to shift gears now and just share a tool with you. The Academic Career Readiness Assessment is a tool that is available online for free. It was developed by some of our colleagues at the University of California, San Francisco, for graduate students and postdocs to assess their skills. So it was actually developed by life science faculty who were looking at what they look for, as Irene and Adam just shared with us, in applications. And they came from different kinds of institutions. So I wanted to show you just briefly what it looks like. You can read about on the Academic Career Readiness Assessment teaching practices. And then I know this is tough to see, but what are faculty committees looking for? What percentage of people who are at teaching institutions are looking for that particular skill? Teaching experiences. There's an analogous categories for research experience. So what about qualifications they're looking for? Publications, research productivity, commitment to diversity, and other aspects of your application. So it's just a tool that you can take a look at. And I will say it was designed for STEM and quantitative fields, but I think it can be useful for arts, humanities, and social science candidates as well. I've read it, and I think it's really helpful to think through what should you focus on. So it's not an assessment that you can actually take. It's more a reflection of hiring committees, and they have said, this is something that's important to me. You should think about this. So where do you look for jobs? How many of you, raise your hands, have heard of the Chronicle of Higher Education? Okay, so some. That is a journal that we read fairly regularly. It includes news items about what's going on in higher education in the US and in some cases abroad. But it has a jobs link. So you can start your job search by just starting to scroll through the jobs that are listed in the Chronicle. People often refer to it in shorthand by the Chronicle. Inside Higher Ed is another website you can use. HigherEd360.com is the one that I mentioned earlier, where if you have a geographic search, I would encourage you to use that, and I'll show you what it looks like in a minute. Your disciplinary society or your professional association might have a jobs link on their website. They may or may not, but if you can attend a regional or national meeting for your field, that will enable you to start to network with people who might have jobs open. So definitely take a look at that. The National Postdoc Association also lists jobs. So that's another source where you can start to look for actually both postdocs and faculty jobs. So this is what the Chronicle looks like. You can search by keyword, location, type of job, and how close you need to be to your geographic location. This is inside Higher Ed's portal. So same thing, same type of search engine, and you can start to look and you can see how many jobs are listed based on your general field. This is Higher Ed 360. So once you put in a keyword, it will bring up all of the jobs in that field, or you can click on colleges and universities, and that will take you to the list of states. And if you're interested in a particular state, it actually lists all of the institutions in that state. So if you're not sure what colleges are in Massachusetts, there are a lot. I used to, as I mentioned earlier, I used to live in Boston, and I don't know if you know Route 95, but within Route 95, which circles Boston, there are 59 colleges and universities. So Higher Ed 360 is great if you know you have to be in California. It lists every California institution, and the links go directly to the listings. So it's really easy to use. So where else can you look? You can look at institutional programs that I talked about earlier. If there are, for example, there's a Virginia Tech program that helps people move into postdocs and then faculty jobs. There's a similar program at UNC Chapel Hill where they hire a postdoc and then that person can move into a faculty job later on at UNC. So there are institutional programs. Look at institutions' websites, which is what we just talked about with Higher Ed 360. Look at newsletters. So hnet.org is excellent for humanities jobs. You can look for specific places to look at, like in a professional group. The Earth Science Women's Network has a listserv. And one of the postdocs that I worked with actually found a job just by being a member of a listserv for the Earth Science Women's Network. So you can be on social media. People at different institutions are starting to post their jobs on LinkedIn. So be active on LinkedIn. And then leverage and rely on your network. So people that exist in your current network. So where did you go to undergrad? Were you are you in touch with friends, colleagues from undergrad, faculty, staff from your undergraduate institution? Same with UVA, same with other places that you've worked, your professional association or society. So other places to look for jobs, you can actually, for those of you online, you can share those in the chat. Okay, so Irene definitely mentioned this. Stay organized and pay attention to the job ads. As she mentioned, a lot of candidates, or not a lot, sometimes candidates will not submit the right materials, submit something that they didn't ask for. And it's a very easy way to put your application then in the no pile, right? So really just pay attention to the ads and establish an organizational system that you will actually use. So for example, there are tools you can use online. I actually pulled this from a person who was looking for environmental science jobs. And this is, these are actual jobs. These are real deadlines from last year, rank, locations, and this went on and on. So actually CV and cover letter and other categories are not listed here. So any connections, you might add comments about any of your applications, but then list when you sent the application, list when you heard back, you know, anything at all. But what kind of institution is it? It's a primarily undergraduate institution or a master's institution, PhD. What's the subject area subfield for you to know about? So just be sure to take a look at a system that works for you. Okay, so in terms of application materials, we've heard about all of these. We don't know, based on the Supreme Court decision, exactly what institutions will ask for in terms of DEI statements. They may encourage you to fold in your approach to equity and inclusiveness in your letter, in your teaching statement, or other places. So be sure to read the applications closely. And at this point, I wanted to bring you back to Mentee, and you can still use that same code. So mentee.com 5526-0185. But I wanted to see how confident you feel now about your materials. So in terms of crafting a compelling CV and letter, creating a relevant research statement and one that is appropriate for the institution, as Irene said several times, how to draft a reflective teaching statement, write an impactful diversity and inclusion statement, and how do you coach reference letter writers? That is something that Sam teaches, and we'll be talking about that in the series. So how do you feel? How confident are you right now? So it looks like you're fairly confident in the research statement, CV and cover letter. Likely you've had to use your CV for other applications, but in terms of cover letter, I agree with, I think it was Irene who said it. You can tell if you're using the same letter. You've got to tailor your letter for each job. So okay, so areas that you might want to focus on then are thinking through and reading carefully about diversity and inclusion statements, attending the July 30th event. It will be online completely, so it's an easy one for you to attend. And then how do you coach letter writers? So that is something else that we'll cover. So just wanted to share that quick poll with you. All right, so sample jobs, I just pulled these, they are real, full-time tenure-track jobs, University of Texas in Austin and Hartwick College, small, primarily undergraduate institution. So what you'll find when you start looking at job listings in the Chronicle or Inside Higher Ed or Higher Ed 360 or any of your sources is that the length will vary. So in some cases, you won't have much to go on, even in the job ad. But I thought I'd pull these for you just to show you the difference. So if you look at the left-hand side and look at UT Austin, they indicate a record of peer-reviewed research commensurate with rank. This was open rank. And a strong record of teaching. Preferred qualifications include a distinguished record of scholarship, contributions to public scholarship, and promotion of scholarship in and about the study of Texas. Sorry, I missed a word there. Versus Hartwick College. So teaching load will average 20 semester credit hours, all faculty members teach during the college's distinctive four-year January term. That's interesting. The successful candidate must be committed to excellent, innovative undergraduate teaching that is equitable and inclusive. Tenure-track faculty are expected to actively engage in scholarly and creative activities. That's just like Irene said, it's a myth to think that at small colleges you would not be engaged in research, because you would be. Part of my research was actually to capture where PhDs end up in the US, and I looked at all occupations. And what I found also was that of all occupations in the US that PhDs are currently in, 75% of PhDs are using research in their jobs. So whether they're in a job like mine, for example, we have scholarly research in our field, right? So we have peer-reviewed journals, we publish all the time. And so depending on the different types of jobs, different professional associations you join, you still will have the opportunity to conduct research and publish. Okay, so in terms of setting priorities, use external deadlines. So for full consideration, please submit your application by this date. Try to do that as soon as you can. Open until filled. I would also view that as a priority in terms of application time. How will you know if it's still open? Check the website, see if the post is up. If the search chair's email is included, it is fine to send an email and ask, is the position still open to receiving applications? Finally, wanted to leave you with thinking about wellness. So this is very hard. To Irene's point, the academic job search can be like a full-time job. It's something where you really will need additional support. We four are here for you. Oh, Kelly Oman. So Kelly's here, the Assistant Director of Research Communication as well. And I don't know if I said that Fatima is the Assistant Director for Postdoctoral Affairs. So Fatima is happy to work with all postdocs in every discipline. Really, you need to have a support team. The four of us are here for you in any regard. So if you wanted to sit and complain about the job search, we can do that. If you wanted to have us review your letter and ensure that it matches the job description that you're applying for, we can certainly help you in that way. But let us know how we can support you. And do the same with friends, colleagues. We are thinking about ways that we can support you better. So if you wanted to create a job search small group in your discipline, you could also do that, just as a support group while you go through the job market. So think carefully about what you want out of life after your PhD, after your postdoc. Where would you like to be? And what really brings you joy? Is it mentoring undergraduates? Is it standing up in front of a classroom? Is it being in the lab? So there are a lot of different ways where you can meet those needs and feel joyful in different kinds of occupations, in faculty roles and other roles. It's okay to want something different. Sometimes I have seen there's pressure in some departments, not here, in past jobs I've had where there's pressure to apply only for faculty jobs. It's okay if you're not interested. It's okay if it gets tough and you're tired and you don't want to be on the job market for a faculty job any longer. As I said, there are support systems on campus for you. And this was the other part of my research. I looked at skills that people develop by the very nature of doctoral and postdoctoral training. And you have lots of skills that many different employers are interested in. So definitely think about that. For those of you who might have come in late, if you can just scan this QR code and check in for us, that would be terrific. I think most of you in this room have checked in. So we are happy to take questions. Fatima and Kelly and I are staying afterwards. So if you had any personal questions, we can answer them. And finally, just wanted to leave you with some announcements. So creating strong CVs and cover letters is coming up, and it will be taught by Kelly. So June 20th from 12 to 1, it's online. And just wanted to let you know about the feedback sessions that are coming up in early September. We're willing to review any of your documents. If you can scan this and just take a minute to let us know how you felt about today, it will help us going forward in terms of what we talked about, what we covered, what else would you like to hear, and also what would you like to hear in our upcoming sessions. So would you like to hear from more faculty? Would you like to hear from different kinds of institutions? Is there a topic we didn't cover today that you would have covered? So if you can do that just before you leave, that would be terrific.
Melanie, I just want to chime in too and say that on that survey, there is a question about what topics are we not covering over the course of, the next several months. And we have added a lot of sessions to this series because of feedback from last year. And this is your chance for the participants in this series to tell us what we are still missing that's not on the horizon. Melanie, I do have one question as well too that came into the chat that I'm happy to share. If
Sure.
you're ready. The question is, I wanted to ask the PhD Plus folks, as well as Alex, I think Adam and Irene, whether it was worth it to apply to tenure track positions with an VAP who perfectly matches the job description.
I've run into several postings already that look exciting, and then I see that they're visiting assistant professor on the faculty fits the bill to a T. So should you even apply if it looks like they have someone in the pipeline who might be moving into the position?
I know one thing that they spoke to a little bit, and one of my first thoughts would be something you hit on. If there is a member of the hiring committee that is listed on the position description, it never hurts to reach out. I'd be very careful how you craft that question, but you could absolutely ask. You can also look at how long the position is going to be open for. I think often if it's a really short, maybe just a couple of days, maybe 2-week call, there might be a reason that it's not open longer than that. And I would say it's not that big of a world in reality. Chances are you have 1 or 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon separation from somebody at that university. Sometimes you might be able to do a little bit of homework, ask around to your connections, maybe connections that your advisor or past mentors have, and find out a little bit more about that position and opportunity. That can help save you a lot of time, but also help you identify if there's going to be a potential opportunity there in the end. That being said, they are definitely going to bring in multiple candidates, even if they have one in mind already. And there's no reason that you couldn't necessarily beat out somebody that's a VAP at that institution already. You might bring in something and an expertise, a skill that that person doesn't have, or that university didn't realize that they want that you do have. So keep all that in mind. I wouldn't say sell yourself short, but do your homework.
So I'm putting the evaluation code up again so folks can scan it. I actually had this happen in my family. So people can be in visiting assistant professor jobs and not be hired based on the other candidates who come in. So I still think, to Sam's point, it's worth applying, and just, be yourself, put your best self out there and do the best you can on your letter and your materials, because you never know what might happen. I don't know if you have any other questions in the chat, but I think this is a good time to wrap up. So thank you so much to everyone. Thank you to Sam, and Kelly and Fatima and I are here afterwards if you have questions. So thanks for coming, and we'll see you on June 20th.